Welcome gamers to Rule the Waves 3. My name is DasTactic. Welcome to the channel and welcome to this series. This episode is going to be pretty much just an introduction to the series. We're going to talk a little bit about the aspects around this era that we're going to be sort of playing. And of course the game actually extends right from the Ironclads, of the late 19th century all the way through to the 1970s with missile cruisers and everything in between. It's pretty amazing what it actually does cover, and how it models it is very, very interesting as well. This is not a big graphical game, like it's not a 3D, big explosions type game, but it really does model fleet management, I guess would be the way of thinking of it. Naval fleet management, not car fleet management. My head, I don't know why my head goes there. Anyway, it's Navy fleets. Essentially, you're in charge of the Navy of your country. You are not the ruler of a country. You are actually you're sort of down the tree a little bit, but your decisions dictate where the Navy goes while you're in charge. And so generally in the game, and I say generally because there is one exception, but generally in the game you start off with what's called a legacy fleet, and that legacy fleet may not be what you want. And then so over time you have to then adapt and change things as technology comes up as well, to then build the sort of fleet that you want. And every country in the game has got different ways that you can actually approach it and play it, and you do have to sort of plug gaps with different ship designs. And I think the game really, at its heart, it is a ship design game. As in, basically, it's about designing ships, getting the right numbers of those ships, and then using them effectively in combat. Superficially, it looks like it's more of like a fleet combat game, but and the fleet combat is pretty amazing, the way that the AI plays it out as well. And so we'll go through all these different sorts of things over the course of this series. I want each episode to hopefully focus on something a little bit different. I know that there'll be times when we have to go through and focus on different types of battles, because there are different types of battles in this one. So there'll be a fair bit of combat, I hope, in this particular series. But I think the thing you've got to get your head into initially is that you're at the whim of your government, and so you are the Grand Admiral of your fleet, and the government will give you directives over time to do different things. But they'll also then ask your advice, and you can also just get in the way of things and push things in a certain direction. Let's get into the game and we'll talk about it. So this episode is really just going to be about explaining what the options in the game actually are for when you get started, and also to talk a little bit about how we're going to start the actual game itself. Now, if we just go to new game, you've got 4 different starting points. Now, in Rule the Waves 2, you had 2. You had 1900 and 1920. The game in Rule the Waves 2 went from 1900 to 1955. This game goes from 1890, so we've got 10 years earlier, all the way up to 1970. So we're sort of into the era of the missile cruisers by the time the game actually does finish. Now, it's going to take me too long to get to that era, so I just sort of want to keep this relatively short, so that at least if you're watching this one, you've got 15, maybe 10 or 15 episodes to enjoy, hopefully. This is an episode 0, so I'm not going to count this as part of the actual gameplay series. This is just getting set up. 1900 is an interesting sort of start for us, or for anyone, because this is the one where your legacy fleet can be changed by you. Now, if you're a new player, don't go and do that one. But 1900 does give you that aspect. In fact, if we have a quick look at all of the different starts, this might be an interesting way of having a bit of a look at it. So 1890, you've got like the various sort of countries in through here. We're going to be playing as Italy, so I think I'll actually play as Italy here, so you can sort of see what does sort of come up as we sort of click on each of these. So Italy has a mid-sized navy and a decent economy with no worldwide ambitions. It can concentrate on keeping a good force in the Mediterranean. It's then got a whole series of stuff, which we will go through later on when we actually start the actual game itself. It's got dock sizes. It's got different research advantages. There's 1 or 2 extras that weren't in this one. Now, what was it? I think, we got bonus tech at maybe triple turrets. Bonus tech means that you very easily research that when it becomes available. Actually, it might have been motor torpedo boats. Anyway, I can't remember which one it actually is. One of these is sort of new from. It's been a long time since I played Rule the Waves 2, and so I'm a little bit rusty with certain things. But anyway, that's this is for Italy. It's we've got up to 12-inch guns in the 1890 start. If I click on OK, we'll then actually have like a whole lot of different, whatever your name is. That doesn't have any bearing on the game itself. The fleet size actually dictates what your budget is throughout the game. If you are a new player, I'd consider either going small or medium, if you are sort of playing the game. The research rate, just how fast research actually does pick up. The game is frenetic with research through this era, and it was historically. So there were so many things that changed, and I will talk a little bit about this after we just go through these different options. The tech variation, this is sort of like how it varies from when things became available historically. So for example, destroyers became available in 1892, I think. And so if you go none, they will then become available to start researching at that time. Slight means that there can be a little bit of variation as to when they become available for you to actually start your research. And so slight is quite good, and considerable can be up to 6 years difference. So that can be really quite varied if you do sort of play considerable. And playing as somebody who's now, like 100 odd years into the future, 130 years into the future, we've got the benefit of history. So we can sort of think, oh, okay, well, I don't want to build X because I know that Y is coming very, very soon. So by having slight, it means that you won't get things exactly when you want it. And so the default is slight, which is good. Harsher peace deals. I think this is added for because players were complaining about that so often you'd actually win a war and then get nothing for it. So I think when we actually start playing, we'll play with that one on, just so that the wars become more meaningful. I think for a shorter game, I think that would make more sense. AI advantage, they get 10% extra for what they get to do. Slow aircraft development. So if you don't really want to be playing when the air forces hit the ground, which really sort of comes in just prior to World War One, and then just ramps up. It just goes up and up and up. And so they become much, much more important over the course of the game. So you can, if you really wanted to focus purely on ships, you can actually sort of slow the aircraft development down a lot, as well as the airbase size. Now, the airbase is land-based, and so you can actually sort of reduce this one right down so that the actual air bases that are based on land won't have as bigger bearing on your game. The aircraft carriers still will, so just be aware of that. There's a bit of a variation in through there. That will do us, I think, when we sort of have a bit of a look at this one through here. So if we just go cancel and just go to new game. So that was the 1890 start, which is what we're going to be playing, by the way. The 1900 start gives you a few other options. If we just go into Italy, notice how this doesn't change, because some of these things, like the motor bomber FFF, was a parachuted torpedo. I think it was developed in around World War II, maybe just slightly before World War II. It would parachute. They drop it by aircraft. It would land in the water and then slowly increase its circles. So it would until it found a target to hit. And so it was extremely effective. I read a little bit about it because I didn't know what motor bomber was, but it's a motorized torpedo. And so the motorized torpedo was, as I say, it had this ever-increasing spiral, looking for a target, and apparently, from what I read, the different powers around the world, the British really wanted it. So when the armistice with Italy came in 1943, that was one of the things that they really wanted from Italy, was the information about how to build those. And Germany also acknowledged that was the best of the torpedoes that were used throughout World War II in that sort of style. Anyway, it was particularly the plane-launched torpedoes. So anyway, but the game models all of these sorts of things over time. But you don't start off with these, even though it's a bonus tech. It's a bonus tech when it becomes available. Motor torpedo boats as well. These are really quite interesting. I think it's around the World War One era, I think, in the game is sort of when that one does come through. I may be wrong about that. But interestingly, again, just reading a little bit about these different things, I wanted to get a bit of information for my own enjoyment, really, of the game. And the word destroyer comes from torpedo boats were around first. Let's start at the start. You've come from essentially the age of sail, went for like 350 years, like a long, long period of time. And then in the 1860s and 70s, they started to build the iron battleships, like the Monitor and so on and so forth. And we saw these in action in the American Civil War. And so during that period of time, basically the big iron ships got better and better and better, and these essentially became the ironclads. Essentially, where they started, they end up with what's called the pre-dreadnoughts. And in 1890, we're just hitting the high point of the pre-dreadnoughts, and so there's been so much technology that has changed during that time. For example, the age of sail, it was all about getting the ships in nice and close, broadside from each side, lots of carnage. The wooden hulls couldn't really, essentially what you were trying to do was break the waterline with your cannon. The cannon was a muzzle loaded, so you'd sort of pull them back, load the front, push it back in, and then blast away again at the wooden hull. Typically, these were fired at hundreds of yards rather than thousands of yards, and so that was the era of the wooden ships of the Age of Sail. When the ironclads came and the same techniques we use against them, those old muzzle-loaded cannons would just bounce off the iron hull. They were basically impervious to it, but there was, of course, the early ones were quite slow. Also, during this period, you had the steam age sort of came as well. So you ended up with like paddle wheel type arrangements. By the time we hit the 1890s, there's been so much development in the prior 30 years that we now actually have proper steam engines the propeller was then invented during that time. Governments realised that their old wooden warships with cannons just weren't going to cut it, and so we have breech loading guns, we have exploding shells, we have all sorts of technologies that were developed during this period, but it was still super hard to actually get hits on ships. Like, they were very, very inaccurate. Even in the 1890s, you'll sort of see when we play the game, there's a lot of inaccuracies with the way that the actual weaponry was still at that point in time. It's still early days, essentially. And so the interesting thing there is they needed to find a way around getting past these iron hulls. And so around this 1890 era, or a little bit before this, we end up with the invention of the torpedo. And the torpedo, originally it was actually just carried out on a small ship at the bow, plugged onto the actual iron hull. Then they'd sort of scarper and get away from there, and then blow a hole in the side of the ship. And so the torpedo became sort of like the weapon of choice to try to break through the iron hull. By the 1890s, the torpedoes are still a major threat, but they're now they've now got like engines. They've got motors at the back of them, like electric motors type thing, so they can actually now go through the water under their own self-propulsion by this stage. And so it's now, you just need a vessel or a vehicle to be able to get the torpedoes close to an enemy ironclad, and then release them and hope that they're going to hit. They were wildly inaccurate in this early period, but they were the ironclad killer of the day. So that's sort of where things actually develop. I don't want to spend too much time with this, but to come back on the circle, the torpedo boats then became a way of very quickly getting small craft, which are very, very hard to hit with the weaponry on these big ironclads, to get past into a torpedo range, drop their torpedoes, and then get back out of there again. And so these are modelled in the game. You build them later on in the game, but they're essentially like coastal defences. You can really only have motor torpedo boats in the around your coastal areas, and they only operate at night time so that they can actually sort of get in very, very close. To counter torpedo boats, destroyers were invented. And so the destroyers were originally called torpedo boat destroyers, which I didn't know. And I thought that was really, really cool. And so you got the torpedo boat destroyers that then ultimately over time get shortened to destroyer. The role of the destroyer becomes different as well. Submarines are just starting to sort of show their face at this stage of the game as well. So the submarines are now under development. They're very, what's the word? They're not very reliable in this sort of sense. And so you end up with essentially with a situation where you've got the submarines have not hit their straps yet. Well, around World War One is when they're going to be sort of becoming much more viable. They are modelled in the game. You don't actually control the submarine fleets as such, but you do get to control where they operate, and so you don't tactically get to move the submarines around. That's more abstracted as a way of sort of then trying to. You still invest in them and do that sort of stuff, but you don't actually sort of use them in the game as such. What you do use in the game is the big capital ships and the destroyers. So the destroyers are the answer to the torpedo boats, and these were designed to be. And if you got this in your head, like you think, okay, well, the word destroyer, it's there to destroy torpedo boats, meaning also other destroyers. It's a mask for your fleet. It's to push the barriers back, but also they have torpedoes on themselves. So they become the new torpedo boats for fleets, and they can operate wherever a fleet can operate. And so you end up with a range of these. And if you can bring these in close to enemy ships, you can then do some damage if they can survive, because they're not very heavily armoured. The destroyers in the game start off very, very small, with hardly anything on them at all, and then slowly sort of ramp up over the course of the game. Like you start off, I think, at 300 tons and end up at around about 2,000 tons. So it does change dramatically over the course of the 80 years of the actual game itself. Anyway, that's motor torpedo boats. Research advantage just means that we're going to be our ship design. We should actually have better luck with our ship designs over time. So that's sort of where that one sort of does fit. Anyway, that is that's where we sort of were with that one. I'll just click on it. OK. And one thing we'll sort of now start to see is that when we play the 1900 build, sorry about that diversion, but when we play the 1900 build, we will now have destroyers because they've already been invented and they'll be part of our fleet now. They'll be an important part of our fleet. But you have this new one down in through here, which is the manual build of the legacy fleet. By the way, you've got historical resources as well, which I don't know if that was on the previous one. This dramatically changed. If I just cancel that one, just go back to new game, 1890, Italy, okay. Yeah, you don't actually have historical areas in through there. If we just go back to 1900, so new game, 1900, and look, each one of these starts has got a different parameter around them. This is very close, of course, only 10 years difference from what we're seeing. We've still only got the 12-inch guns, for example, in this particular part of the game. Click on OK. What we have is we now have historical resources, and so what this does is the game tries to balance things out a little bit for the long haul for each country, just to give it some sort of semblance of balance. If you play with historical resources, it means that you'll be playing for the vast majority of the factions. You'll be playing with a lot less resources at the start for your build. It makes it more difficult for the smaller nations, and like Great Britain, I think, starts off with its normal resources, whether it's historical or not. Anyway, the other thing is manual build of the legacy fleet. This allows you to basically come into the game and then build what you want to have as your starting fleet from scratch. This is a big deal, actually, and particularly if you've played a few games, I think that you'll enjoy that aspect. So I would certainly look at that if you are interested in sort of, if you know a little bit about the game and you've got a very clear idea of how you want to build a particular fleet to operate in certain areas of the maps, then by all means go and build your own. But you can only do that in the 1900 start. All right, let's just cancel back out again. New game. The 1920 start is really interesting. This is just after World War One, and so the start here, if we just go back across and click on OK, we've got a few different things. We've got the Treaty of Versailles is in effect, and so this is actually where we've got like a slightly different one through here. Actually, if I just go cancel again, hang on, new game, 1920. I just wanted to see if there was, so you can see the dock size has gone up dramatically in this period of time. We've still only got the 12-inch guns, but things are still sort of developing. You'll notice that the text don't actually change at all. Anyway, let's just keep on going. You've got the Treaty of Versailles, which affects the the German aspect of the game at this stage. You also have arms limitation treaties, which are quite interesting. If you play this particular start, you can with a random treaty, you get to sort of have a bit of a say as to what the limitations are that essentially the United Nations, I forget what they were called back in this era, but anyway, the United Nations sort of dictate what the countries can actually go and build. So again, it presents a different way of looking at the game at that particular point in time. So anyway, that's just again, a bit more interesting way to sort of start the game. And then if we go to New Game and then 1935, of course, we're just now into the lead up to, of course, the World War II. Pick on Italy again. By this stage, we're now fascist. So we've got like a different sort of government type. Still got the same dock size, 35,000. Got up to 15-inch guns now, so there's been more development that's happened in that particular period. These all have bearings on the game as well. I'll try to sort of explain a little bit about how these sort of do work. They often change things like, for example, how fast you can build ships, how effective your crew are, whether, like you can see there, we've got some corruption for Italy, and that's all the way through there. It means that you may not have as much ammunition on your ships as you think you might have when you actually hit the water. So things like that. There's little things that sort of just tweak the way the game does sort of play. If we've got poor education, that means that again the build of the ships will be slow. Like it's more of an unskilled workforce. So there's little things like this all the way through the game that just tweak things, and some of the things like fascist. Some of the leaderships, like bombastic head of state, means that the government is more likely to take dramatic or give dramatic objectives, and is more likely to just go and do whatever they want to do, essentially diplomatically, which can lead to a fairly interesting game because you don't know what's going to happen. Like it makes it a bit more of a random component there. Inconsistent naval policy as well also means that the directives you get from government, because you don't control the actual overriding, like they will say, hey, we need more battleships, or hey, we need more destroyers, or whatever it might be, and you have to then satisfy that in amongst your own goals. So you've got your own goals and their goals that you're trying to then sort of manage at the same time. So anyway, that's all of these do actually have a bit of a bearing on what does go on. Cautious means that they may react with, that may counteract some of the stuff from bombastic head of state, but generally, like you do have a say in the government, you just don't have the overriding say in the government. So anyway, let's continue on. So that's that's in this particular area. We've just gone okay. You'll notice that we're back to very, very simple aspects now. So we're just back down to pretty much the 1890 start, but we've got, of course, the technology is so much more advanced than when we sort of start with the 1890 start, and of course we're now dealing with ships that have got like there's aircraft everywhere. There's all sorts of things that sort of just on the aspect of being on the precipice of being discovered. And so technology plays a massive role, as we sort of as I touched on briefly with that 1890 sort of start. I'll just go cancel. But so they're the different eras of the game, and when you have a look at them, you're thinking, okay, well, none of them, like there's no World War I start, and there's no World War II start. You go through to the 1970s. Where's all the battle starts? It's not. The game is not a historical simulation of the countries at war. It's important to understand that. In that aspect, the game is much more of a sandbox, where when you start, like if we start, for example, with the 1890 and go and click on Italy, these are the various opponent nations. Now, traditionally, we would have like our friends and allies, and we do still have those to a degree. The game has got like a hidden file of sort of, a little bit like with whether they're friendly or unfriendly, but it doesn't have a massive bearing in the game. Anything can actually happen in this political arena. So this aspect of it is much more like a sandbox. Where the game does an incredible job of simulating is in the technology and the application of the technology. And so the actual battles that are played out, like if you don't design your ships well, then you are going to suffer in those battles depending on what you're trying to do. For example, if you play as Italy, the reason I want to play as Italy is because it's fairly contained and relatively makes sense as for somebody who's a new player. You don't really have overseas objectives, so you really are focused on the Mediterranean, and that's sort of what I wanted, something that was going to be contained. On the other extreme, you have Great Britain, and so Great Britain is essentially a great power, and Great Britain has got an empire, a global empire to try to control. And so their fleets are really stretched. They're extremely powerful, the biggest ships in the game, the most powerful ships in the game, but they're everywhere. And so they need to stretch what they do they have to really think about what they do, and so that it's very easy for them to become overwhelmed. But having said that, they are the most powerful. So each country has got like an aspect about it. So if you are designing ships for Great Britain, you have to think, am I protecting a small area, or am I trying to go off and protect like large holdings around the world? And the answer to that is you're trying to protect large holdings around the world. And so you need ships that can operate at extreme range, that can sort of operate like a gunboat diplomacy, essentially. And so that's the way that you would then approach the game, typically as Great Britain. France is a little bit of a hybrid, where you have some, areas, for example, in the Caribbean that you do want to sort of have some control over. And similarly with Spain. Spain is an interesting one. It's a tiny little country at the time of 1890, but it has got like a lot of overseas territory, which means that it's really stretched. It's very hard to play as Spain. So it says, not recommended for beginners playing as Spain. It's quite funny because when you play the game, even though they're in the Mediterranean, they don't have any real interest in the Mediterranean. They've got all their interests are elsewhere, like in the Philippines and in the Caribbean again as well. So there's all these different aspects about, and so there's each country that you play, you've got to think, okay, well, what sort of ships? My limit is like 7,000 tons. What can I build under 7,000 tons that's going to do X, Y, or Z? Like, how are we going to protect our holdings in the Caribbean against the British, which will have big battleships, like big, like I think they had 15,000, double the size ships. What can we do to protect that? So we have to you have to think ahead a little bit of the game, trying to think, okay, well, what strategy can I use with the build? And so each country has these different objectives. Germany, for example, has no real areas overseas. It has a little bit in 1890, particularly in the South Pacific, but nothing major. And so they lose all that later on if you do some of the other starts, like the 1920 start, 1935 start. All of those territories are gone. But at the start, you have a little bit that you have to look after. But primarily, you're sort of looking at either trying to control Russia or trying to get raiders out into the Pacific, not the Pacific, into the Atlantic. So you can start to sort of, if you are at war with one of the powers, you're looking for fast ships. You're looking for fast, effective ships that can then take on particularly transports. So you're looking for to do the maritime the maritime trade. You're trying to sort of impact that through raiding type ships. So each faction has got like a different focus. For us playing as Italy, we are really focusing on the Mediterranean. The other country that's really focused on the Mediterranean is Austria-Hungary. And so they also then will have, we'll be competing with them essentially. That will be, when we start as Italy, we'll be competing primarily with Austria-Hungary. Now, with the later starts, Austria-Hungary is no longer in the game. And so they get sort of gobbled up, sort of around the World War I era, and so they no longer really play a big role. They're no longer considered a naval power at that point in time. But the Adriatic Sea is sort of going to be like the main area that if we end up at war with Austria-Hungary, and this is one thing I do want to end up doing, is trying to show how to push your government towards an objective that you want. And I do want to be going to war with Austria-Hungary. If we have a look and see what Austria-Hungary has got, these are quite interesting because they are small. They've got their dock size is only 9,000, so they can't build anything like the Italians at the start of the 1890 area. But you can see there that their government type is a limited democracy. They don't have any of the negatives that we have with corruption and poor education. So in that sense, they can grow fairly fast. Now, I was tempted to play as Austria-Hungary, but then the way that we'd have to play an 1890 start would be to try to stop the aggression of Italy, meaning that we'd have to sort of almost give a lot of ground initially while we build up, but eventually we would build up enough to take them on. And so I thought playing as Italy, we can afford to be aggressive at the start before Austria-Hungary really sort of takes hold. And so that's sort of where we're going to be sort of going with with the Italians, is to try to dominate early so that we can then sort of do enough damage to them early that it's hard for them to ever catch up. And then every time they start to catch up, we then just smack them on the head again and basically put them back in their place. And that would be sort of that's how I want to focus on playing as Italy in this era. Also, inside the Mediterranean, we have France and Britain also have holdings throughout the Mediterranean, as you'll sort of see when we get into the actual game itself. So, anyway, I've spent half an hour just doing this introduction. I haven't even started the game yet. But Austria-Hungary is going to be our main threat in this particular run-through. Their research advantages in torpedo technology. So we can expect more from their torpedoes than what we can do. And that's a problem, because remember I said at the start that torpedoes were built as the ironclad killer, and we are starting off in the ironclad era. So, and they do actually have triple turrets as well, same as us. So we also have triple turrets as a bonus tech. But while we've got the motor torpedo boats as a bonus tech, they've got a research advantage with torpedo technology. So we can expect to see better torpedoes on their ships fairly early on in the game, actually, and then they'll always be the range will be a little bit better, they'll be a little bit more effective. So that's, for us, is a major problem, and it's going to then dictate how we play the game. So just knowing these sorts of things. They only got up to 11-inch naval guns, but that's all okay. So let's go and choose Italy. As I say, it would be interesting to play as Austria-Hungary, because eventually, if you can just keep peace for 5 or 6 years, you may be able to build up enough of a force to then take Italy on. So playing as Italy, we want to do the opposite. We want to actually go to war as early as we possibly can, and I thought that was a good objective for the simple reason that it gives us something for the series to actually then get involved in fairly early on. So that will be our objective, is to sort of push our luck with Austria-Hungary, and then we sort of go through the different aspects. Now, when we start a game, I'll just click on OK, and I'll choose the small fleet size. And so this is I'll just hover there. In terms of the scale of the game and how many ships you can handle, new players are recommended to use medium or large. And actually, it's funny, because in the manual it says the opposite. It says to go small or medium. And I think small or medium for a new player is actually better. I think that may be a bug in the tooltip. I think that small is better for beginning players because there's less to manage. And so you're sort of like, everything is scaled down a little bit. It just makes it easier. And I think that also for me, explaining how combat works and how everything actually does work, having the smaller scale will just fit better with what we're trying to do. I'll call this one DasTactic. There we go. We'll make it an Italian sounding name. Or DasTactico. There we go. DasTactico, there we are. So that will be our name. I'll keep harsher peace deals on. That will mean that if we lose a war, it's going to be, it's going to be fairly dramatic. And if we win a war, we should get some things back from it, which would be nice. I think it'll just make our shortest run with this game, because it can be played for an extremely long period of time. The shortest run that we're going to have with the game will be more fun if the stakes are higher. Let's go and choose game slot number 1. I did clear these out. I had them all pretty much full, testing different things. I've had the game for about a week, and I've been thoroughly enjoying it. This is still pre-release. I've got a pre-release version of the game, so there may be some changes. Some things I sort of thought, I wonder if they're going to change that, when I've actually reported them back in. The reports back have been, no, that's all great. Oh, by the way, at the very start, I forgot to thank Naval Warfare Simulations, who are the developers of the game. This is the first of the Rule the Waves games that are being produced by Slytherin, the Slytherin group, which is essentially Slytherin and Matrix games. So also a special thank you to Slytherin and Matrix for the ability to be able to record this, ahead of time, and to be able to sort of present this series. I do really appreciate that. So thanks to the devs. And while I'm doing thank yous, also a thank you to my Patreon supporters, or anyone that's bought merchandise over the years, I guess now. It does certainly help the channel. So anyway, let's get into the actual game itself. I won't spend too much time, but let's have a bit of a look at I guess, the important big things that we need to sort of consider. So we're going to be the Grand Admiral. We're not the government. So just to get that across. Click on OK. So it generates the initial fleet. Now this is random, which is really, really cool, because we don't know what we're going to get. Now this is a really interesting start playing as Italy. This is something that you don't often see. We've only got 2 battleships. So we've got 2, these are 10,600 tons. They're very, very slow. And so these are pretty crappy design, although they do have 4 13-inch guns, but these are slow ships in through here. I was sort of hoping for this sort of start, to be honest, because this is this for me is quite interesting and exciting, because it means that we're going to have to still think ahead a little bit as to how we then sort of prosecute a war. One thing we'll sort of see is we've only got 1 armoured cruiser as well, and then we've got a whole heap of light cruisers. These are hit and run ships, and so these are, before we end up getting the destroyers, these essentially fulfil our destroyer role. We can't bring them in close to enemy battleships. We have to sort of keep them fairly far away. So this is a very poor fleet playing as the Italians in the Mediterranean, which is, as I say, is going to make it a little bit more fun, I think, to play this way. So I'm sort of happy for that one. Ships under construction. Actually, we do have 3 more battleships, so that's going to round out our battleships fairly nicely. We do have a new design, the Regina Margherita, and this is actually still only a slow ship. So it's slow with, so this is going to be a hard way to play, to be honest. Anyway, we're going to have 3 more battleships. They're all going to be coming within the next year and a half of gameplay. And the game it's one of these things, because you're not, as I said some time ago, you're not simulating. It's not a simulation of global warfare or anything like that. It's a simulation of the technology of ships throughout this particular era, and things do change dramatically. And so that particular design, sometimes you'll play where the design that will be generated for you will be much, much faster, for example. And we can have a look to see what this one's got. If I just right click and just go to open the design, we can then actually have a good look at everything. So there's the speed. One of the things you'll notice, it's got an S and an A. And so when I hover over there, S is short ranged, A is cramped accommodation, which is part of the design of the ship. And so at 10,600 displacement, the short range means that it really is suitable for the Mediterranean. And that's pretty much it. It's not going to be wanting to go too far away from home. And that's fine, because that's what we want. So in that aspect, that's something that is actually quite interesting. The accommodation is cramped. Again, this means that it more sort of comes back to dock every day or every couple of days, and then the crew then go back to their homes and then go back in and serve again. Again, for the Mediterranean, that's fine. This sort of works out fairly well. This is interesting. I think that the reason that this is actually such a big ship, but without much really going for it in terms of speed, etc., is that they've put a lot of there's a hell of a lot of iron around the ship itself. So the armour, this is extremely heavily armoured. And so this one possibly could go in fairly close, except that the Austria-Hungary side have got the better torpedoes. We have to be very, very careful with this. Everything else is looking pretty good, I think, just very superficially. We're slightly overweight, so this is going to be a little bit overweight. If I go and click the tick box here, even though I've already got them built, you can have a bit of a look. And I would strongly suggest, when you are actually sort of getting used to the game, click on this tick box all the time to check the designs, even the ones that you've got currently built. So aero ships are built to design with this name. Select another name. I mean, we're not building this one, but this is essentially, that's just, we can't call it the Italia anymore. Note, this ship has a narrow belt. This is actually the belt coverage in through here. That means that it doesn't extend down much below the waterline, which again would possibly make it sort of so that any hits that are low, like a torpedo hit, could do massive damage. So that's a vulnerability of this particular ship, which is a problem. These are all things in your head. You're automatically thinking, okay, I need to keep at least from torpedo range away from any of the Austria-Hungary ships, and so that becomes important, particularly with the narrow belt coverage. So that's just a note. So it's just telling you, beware of that. Note, the ship is slightly overweight, and so this one here, we've just we saw that bit one there before. That's going to then affect its handling a little bit. It's just, you can go up to 10% overweight, I think, in the total amount. So we're sort of halfway. I think we're about 5% overweight, just by the look of the numbers. What is it? 10,646. That would have actually, I forget how much we can go. Maybe not 10%. I forget what the weight amounts actually have to be with this. Anyway, cramped accommodation, which may limit its operational usefulness, which is fine for the Mediterranean. Short range. Now, all of this means that we're saving space. So we're not looking after the crew. We're not sort of putting in lots and lots of coal storage. With all of that stuff is coming off, so that we can actually then put more armor on the ship, which is what looks like that has happened. This has a low freeboard, which might limit its performance in heavy seas. Again, this is actually fine for the Mediterranean. We're not going to see heavy seas really in the Mediterranean, and it's not like we're taking this thing out to the Atlantic. So this is purely for use around Italy, but it's a slow ship. So it's not legal because of these errors, but we can't do anything. Like, we do start with a caliber of guns that is beyond what we can actually build, and the game does that. I notice that a lot with the different factions. It will start off with something that's just a little bit above what they can actually then go and do. If we just go and cancel that, so that's actually that one through there. Then we actually have our cruisers look pretty good. They've got like a speed. The armoured cruiser has got a speed of 21, and then the light cruisers have got a speed of 22. And you can see there that they're different. There's different. There's the Taranto class. There's a Masala class. So we've got different classes of ships all the way through here. The Nino Brixio, and so we can have a quick summary. These have got 8 5-inch guns. The armoured cruiser has got like 4 7-inch guns. I should probably do this in the next episode when we're looking at things, but it's just interesting to sort of see what we start with. And so this is where we're starting. And with it and in your mind, like, the battleships are more, they slug it out with the other battleships. They slug it out. They're slow moving. They're great at blockades, so they can blockade ports. They're more built for bigger engagements. They're not hit and run sort of ships. The armoured cruisers are a little bit more hybridy. They can they're not quite as strong as the battleships, but quite often, like, you'll see they've got like 4 7-inch guns, which is not really all that effective. We don't have anything that's got any great firepower other than the 2 battleships at this point in time. And so one thing I love about this game is it randomly generates the battleships for you every single time you play. The replay value of this game is through the ceiling. It is just amazing. So every time you play it, there'll be different parameters. This is the last time I played as Italy as a test leading up to this one. I think my ships were able to travel at 18 knots, and they were better built for longer range, and I had more of them. So again, it means that you've got like a different way of looking at the game every time you sort of do play it, which is really, really cool. 22 knots is very, very fast in through here for our lights. So we're going to be very good at raiding. And that's going to be one of the things that we're going to be very, very strong at. So we're going to be strong at raiding. But how do we compare to Austria-Hungary? And I think I'll just finish off this with that aspect, because this is important. Like, you can see that Austria-Hungary starts the game with a little bit more tension than what we actually have. We're at tension 5 with them. Russia also doesn't particularly like us. They're at tension 4. Germany likes us. So Germany is low. That's only 2. It does go off the screen, unfortunately. USA is 3. The rest of these are just 3. But so we've already got a little bit of a problem with Austria-Hungary. If we go to the Almanac and have a look at this, is such a useful tool in the game. If we go to Austria-Hungary, and we can then sort of get the same summary that we saw there at the start. We can also see what their technology are, what we know of their technologies. One thing I didn't mention is that the game is, at this era, spies are incredibly important for naval technology. This is a massive thing in the game where you really do need to be mindful of your spying operations. I'll talk about this in the next episode when we sort of set up the actual the turns and get sort of things established. But we can go to ships. They've got 5 battleships, 3 of them operational. They've got guns. They've got they're all operating in the Mediterranean. They've got 3 12-inch guns on their battleships. Theirs are a lot smaller in size. So I'm guessing if we go and look at the data, we can then sort of see a little bit 8-inch belt armor. Ours is 14. So we've got much better protection. They've got like 2 turrets at the front and 1 turret at the back. That's the 3 12-inch guns that they actually have. The what else have we got there? So they're building the Kaiser class is being built for 1891, so they'll be coming next year as well. So we're going to have 5. Do we have 5? Hang on, what did we have? Yeah, we're going to have 5. They're going to have 5. So it's going to be fairly even in terms of the actual battleships themselves. If we just go back to the Almanac again, so it's going to be some interesting times ahead. I think you can see there they've only got like 2 lights, 1 armored cruiser. So we certainly in our In our sort of mid-strength ships, we dominate that, but they like, depending on, these are only small as well. Have a look at the Kaiser, go to the data. So we don't actually know anything. We need spies to tell us what they are building and what's going on. But we can sort of see there the 8-inch skirt that they have, or the belt around these particular. So we've got basic information. They're faster than our ship at 17 knots, which is a bit of a problem. So they can actually hunt us down if they do get any sort of advantage. And the 3 12-inch guns mainly fire from the front. So we can see a lot from this, and sort of start to plan accordingly. But the hit and run tactics, I think that based on the fact that we've got so many more light cruisers than what they've got, means that we're going to be able to raid much, much more effectively than they will. We'll be able to protect our assets better than what they will as well. So it's going to be interesting times ahead. Anyway, guys, I'm going to leave this episode here because I think that this gives us enough of a feel for what we're going to be expecting. Actually, we'll just go to the map so you can sort of see the map. So we'll just zoom in on the Mediterranean, and so we can sort of see there that this is just to give it some sort of context. So Spain has certainly got like areas around in through here. France has got some holdings down through the North Africa and across in through this part of the Mediterranean as well. Italy controls the middle of it, but only really at its home base. We also have Eritrea. We start with Eritrea down through here on the other side of the Suez Canal. If we can maintain good relations with Britain, they'll allow us to use the Suez Canal if we do need to send ships down that way. So we can actually sort of go into the Indian Ocean via the Suez Canal as long as we're friendly with Britain. I forget what the number has to be. I think it has to be under a relationship of 7. It will then allow you to use it. Like you can see there with this one here, we've got a relation of 5. I think when it turns yellow, that's when you can no longer. That's when Britain then stops you from using the Suez Canal. So that's sort of not something we have to really focus on. You can see Britain sort of controls this area of the Mediterranean. There's a lot of independent areas in the Mediterranean as well, which we may be able to eventually sort of take over through the course of the game. And then Austria-Hungary controls this area up through here of the Adriatic. So it's interesting. It's poised in an interesting start. I do like the start. It's nicely contained. It's going to be good fun. I hope it is anyway. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will catch you in the episode 1, which was where we sort of start to actually play the game.